These are some historic images and sounds that represent and symbolize what we know as the Holocaust. Since the year 1945, this word has taken on a horrible meaning in our world, the mass murder of over 6 million European Jews. The German Nazi regime caused a time of great devastation during the Second World War. Adolf Hitler was the leader of the Nazi Party and gained his power over Germany in January of 1933. Hitler's goal was to create the perfect race of Aryans, and in order to reach his goal, he had to exterminate the Jews that lived in Europe. After acquiring his power in 1933, Hitler began to take immediate action against the undesired races and ethnic groups of Europe. Although there were different groups of people involved in the Holocaust other than Jews, it is still mostly connected to the people with a Jewish background. When Hitler came to power, the Jews began to see a change in their lives. Jews were just about completely removed from all public life between the years 1933 and 1934. This was possible because the Nazi government had set up a boycott of Jewish businesses. This caused Jews to lose their businesses and excluded them from having any kind of life outside of their homes. However, the isolation and humiliation of the Jews did not end with the boycotts of their businesses. The Nuremberg laws were passed in 1935, and these laws dehumanized the Jewish people even more. The Nuremberg laws resulted in Jews losing their citizenship and prevented them from having any kind of relationship with anyone of the Aryan race. In 1938, Nazis were allowed to go in any remaining Jewish businesses or homes and smash windows and doors down, and the Second World War would start a year later. When the war started in 1939, the final solution was put into action. The final solution was Nazi Germany's next plan to rid Europe of the Jewish people. This was the most deadly part of the Holocaust. The final solution was in full effect by the year 1942. For most of the people who were part of the final solution, they noticed it in a few stages that grew more drastic the longer it lasted. The first stage of the final solution was to identify all the Jewish people. Jews were required by law to wear a yellow Star of David somewhere on their clothing. The star had to be visible at all times. This made it easier for Nazi officers to identify Jews and to target them in public. Nazi officers would embarrass Jews in public, make them perform difficult tasks for them, or beat the Jews in public for no reason. The stage that followed the wearing of the Star of David was moving the Jews into ghettos. Ghettos were an area where Jewish people were forced to live. They were often involuntarily moved from their homes into new ones in a designated area just for Jewish people. Those houses were usually smaller and multiple families lived in one household. Many families tried to keep their lives as close to normal as possible, and they tried to keep the faith strong by having religious meetings in their homes. Deportation was the next stage in the final solution. This was when the Jews were removed from their homes or ghettos. Sometimes the Jewish people were loaded into cattle cars or on trains and taken to a field or wooded area to a mass grave where they were killed immediately. There were other Jews that were loaded on the cattle cars and taken to concentration camps. These camps were usually miles away from where the Jewish people were currently living, and it took days to reach the camps. At these camps, the Jewish people and other non-Jews lived in constant fear of what was to come next. Their lives were always at risk because there were many ways to be killed at a concentration camp. They could be put in gas chambers where they were forced to inhale poisonous fumes. There were doctors who performed unnecessary experimental surgeries that usually resulted in the death of the patient. The prisoners could also be burned to death in the giant crematories. Death could also come from the Jewish and non-Jews being overworked or from the lack of food and water. There were 6 main concentration camps used by the Nazi Party. The total death toll for all of the concentration camps reached close to 3 million prisoners, but the cause for each death is unknown. The reality of harshness, hardships, and tragedy faced during the Holocaust were all too real for young Monique in Patricia Polacco's The Butterfly. Monique lives with her mother, Marcel, in a small village outside of Paris. The story shows us an underlying picture as to how Jews were treated during this time period and the things they were faced with. Monique encounters a surprise that gives her a whole new outlook on how Jews were treated during the beginning of the Holocaust. Marcel has been keeping a secret from her daughter for quite some time, one that could determine the difference between life and death for the young girl and her mother. What great sacrifices would one make for others during such a crucial time in history? You will have to read Patricia Polacco's The Butterfly in order to figure out what secret has been kept for such a long time.